Hello and welcome to my 200 scale Arios Let's Build video. I've noticed a lot of YouTube channels like to keep their segments consistent with snapping kits together on camera, reviewing, unboxing and package videos. I like doing things differently to others, though I thought I'd give the Let's Build a go in my own style to see how you guys react to it. I've also a while ago been granted to make videos longer than 15 minutes by YouTube, which I never really knew the extent of these limits until I got that message, and my mentor, Too Old for Toys, gave me a bit of a background information on how these longish videos work and warned me against it, but I'm deciding to have a go at it. A little background information about this kit, as I'll be talking for a long time and we'll try to keep it interesting. It's the 200 scale Arios with a fair amount of articulation. It doesn't have a recommended price, but I did purchase this from Hobbyco in Sydney for around $10. It's fairly articulated and it looks like a decent kit, though there's a lot of trouble with colouring and masking, so there'll be a major challenge in painting this kit, which you'll see later on in this video. It's also made out of ABS, so I'm going to clear up a lot of rumours about that, and it has that special technique of being able to snap straight off the gates without the use of nippers, which I'll explain shortly. ABS is an extremely brittle plastic and snaps and breaks a lot easier than styrene, though it has a reasonable amount of styrene in it, so you're able to glue it together with certain strength types of cement, and weaker cements you have to dredge quite a lot of liquid on it for it to break down and fuse the plastic together well enough. The advantage with this kit is you're able to snap it and out of the frames and snap the kit straight together within 10 minutes. But the downside is there is a bit of cleanup to do, and because the nub marks are so small, most people ignore them. We only have to sand or file it off instead of using a knife, which is really convenient. Now, there's rumour going around that ABS is easily melted or damaged from lack of paint. I'm going to clear this up as a bullshit statement, because you have a lot of trouble with certain cements in gluing the ABS together, so you have to use the strongest plastic weld possible or regular Tamiya cement. And also during this build I sprayed primer and lacquer onto this kit, and there was no sign of melting or becoming brittle. If anything, I believe ABS is a far stronger and superior plastic to styrene, though personally still like to work with styrene over ABS. But due to the brittleness, a lot of small points like polycaps or the ends that you put polycaps in, you normally have small bottlenecks where a lot of stress or articulation is placed on a Bandai kit. So you'll find with these high grades or ABS kits, they will snap at that point, and once broken, near impossible to repair unless you pin it, which I do have a video about that. The breakage regularly occurs around the hips or where the actual legs plug into the crutch of the kit. Back to this particular kit, the cleaning stage was fairly easy on that shoulder pad by using a high grit sandpaper. I've started using the sanding sticks around a 600 grit, normally what you find women use on their fingernails, and then I move on to a finer grit sandpaper for cars like 800 to 1000 grits wet, and this produces a very smooth, clean finish piece. A major problem with this kit is there's no polycaps for the articulation, and there's a lot of points where this kit can move or be posable, which is relying on plastic connections. Now, this is a fairly basic simplistic kit, so a lot of these connections don't work that well and are extremely tight or poorly fitting, so I had to do quite a bit of work with the Dremel or file to shave it down well enough so they can fit, And furthermore, so we can allow for paint primer, or I'll have to actually mask these points after working on it to a state that I like it at. This is quite unusual among Bandai kits, as it's easy to pull apart and paint, yet it's plastic on plastic articulation. So if you are working on a kit like this, you have to make a judgment call on how much material you cut or remove for it to fit well. Always cut as little as possible and keep test fitting it until it's quite snug, because if you remove too much material, it's extremely difficult to add extra and file back to get a correct fit. So take your time and use your judgment to do a correct job, or otherwise you'll have a very floppy, loose kit. On the same note, this is a snap kit, so supposedly glue isn't required, and you have these pins and guiding holes where you're able to connect it together. Again, with the nature of this particular line of kits, once you snap these pieces together, you're not going to pry it open without major damage, which is difficult to clean up and reopen and close. This is easily done by putting the blade of your knife in the guide hole and spinning it to widen the hole, and removing some material from the actual pin that sticks into the hole, so you have an extremely loose fit, though still tight enough to loosely click together and pull apart later for painting and further assembling down the track. You can practice this on any type of kit and glue it at a later date, even after painting, the use of super glue. Earlier on, I was talking about video trends, and I'm quite interested about the popularity of these let's build videos. Normally people use it as a way of broadcasting news while they're snapping together, or watching someone enjoy a kit that you don't have, which after myself watching them, I find them a bit dry or boring, because normal Bandai kits is quite repetitive tasks, and once you've built a higher grade or a master grade, you get used to the very minimal difference between kit to kit according to their ages, and only limited amount of these videos can be made. I'm not too sure where people find the excitement or joy of watching them, though my goal, in between giving as much information as I can in half an hour, is commentate a bit on this community. It's extremely funny. I've always promised myself not to follow these trends, particularly the I've got a package or what's in the box type things. I'm normally interested to see if someone picks up something quite rare or a kit that I've never seen before, but normally always sit out quite disappointed in what people uncover from their unboxing videos. I promise myself that they're quite cheap to put together and very little effort, and I don't want to build that a part of my channel, though it's cool if other people's doing it. I don't mind. I'm following a trend right now, but I'm hoping to do something with it. The interesting thing with this Arios, or this kit in general, when I go out and buy kits or work on things, I'm always interested in small, rare, or extremely weird kits. And when I saw this and the fact that it said on the back not to be intended to be sold within Japan, I found it quite interesting that since in Japan they have a lot of limited edition or special kits for events or artists, a lot like that Linkin Park Gundam that I happened to acquire, that sort of stuff's only sold within Japan, and you have a lot of trouble getting it out. And I see this as some sort of compensation, these small line of kits, but in truth I kind of dislike it. I mean, I've never been a fan of the actual kit subject, but after building it, the actual mechanics of the kit sucks as well, so I didn't really enjoy this build that much, but it was a challenge. My goal with this build was to paint it as accurately as possible to one of those high grade kits and get all the correct markings and lines and colours where they're meant to be, which at that point was semi-enjoyable, and I did get the correct colours for it, but it's just the physical aspects of how it came together, even though interesting and great that I have it finished and sitting on my shelf now. During the build process, there was a lot of thinking and workmanship behind it, so if you're really interested in pushing your modelling skills to the limits, this may be a project for you. Trying to turn this very stiff and awkward coloured thing that would look horrible on the shelf after placing stickers on. It looks like it's marketable to kids or trying to introduce people to the hobby. And if I was introduced to this hobby with this really bizarre looking thing and slap some paint on it, it would scare the hell out of me and I'd probably exit it pretty fast. So yeah, tackle it as a challenge, though in other regards I would not recommend this kit to anybody else who holds interest or participates in this hobby, unless you're sort of into the whole kit bashing and modifying scene. Comparing this to a first grade, it's definitely better than a first grade in many aspects except its size. Let's say the first grade, the RX-7A, that was absolutely horrible. Most of us would like to pretend it never existed unless you glue it together, damage it up and use it as a terrain base, or it's awesome for salvaging parts. It's also better in other regards, like the early kits from the 80s from Zeta and Mobile Suit Gundam, though the advantage of the 1:144 size is you're able to chop them up, modify them, incorporate them in other kits. There's a wealth of things you can do with it, though with a kit this size or this small, it's so much extra effort, and I don't have a lot of love in the actual subject, which is the biggest motivation issue. On top of that, with no subject matter love, I haven't gone to the effort of filling some of the seam lines, which aren't too bad and you could definitely get away with. Another thing that bothers the hell out of me is how the back of those long wing pieces are hollow and you need to fill them out with putty or whatnot, but didn't really want to put the time into this project because I was working on other things, and this is what's known as a mental build. A mental build can be defined by more experienced models when you have a few projects on the go and you get stuck somewhere with a lack of resources, or you break something or lose motivation because a certain chore that you're doing on the models drains you or boring or something you dislike. You may put it down temporarily and you have no drive to work on those other kits, so you might not work on models for a little while due to that downturn. You may crack open a very small, simple model that you like and just quickly put it together with minimal effort, spray it up, and have a quick finish model to get the joy back of the basic elements of the hobby before you start tackling those really large and long-term projects. Back to the Arios, it's all snapped together and spinning for your delight. Just as I predicted, it's not looking spectacular at all to be displayed on your shelf, and these stickers will definitely not improve its look and bring out any of the range of colours from the actual kit. So I've got a few of those lacquers on display that you just saw, primed in white, and try these Mr. Hobby Gundam colours for the first time and see how close they compare to the actual snapped plastic or the actual anime colours. There is a colour guide on the back for the high grade, and I'm going to try to follow the high grade colour scheme as close as possible and incorporate Gaia Gold and Gaia Red Orange colour to simulate what the actual pack does not include. Now, I'd like to keep the parts count as low as possible when I mount these pieces on skewers, so some of them will be glued together, and as you can see I'm using Tamiya cement. That and plastic weld and other full strength cements will glue your ABS together, and we'll prep them on skewers and prepare to spray them with Tamiya white fine primer. I'm not going to prepare the surface by cleaning or any of that, as the strength of the lacquer thinner will do that for me. My first point of call when priming or painting is masking, and this isn't for paint effects. I roll up blue tack and shove them in any holes that are used for articulation or snapping pieces together. If paint gets in there and dries, it's going to prove to be a lot of problems, and on top of that, when it is finally finished snapped together, you will not see where it's not painted because it's on the interior of the kit. The blue tack afterwards is reusable and you can use it as a paint mask many times over, and I haven't thrown out blue tack before. Afterwards, I mount them on the skewers with the alligator clips, which you can make up yourself or you can buy from hobby sites, which I've done recently, and stick them in foam. I've got these Mr. Hobby corrugated cardboard because I accidentally ordered it off and realised I didn't want it. After using them, I kind of got hooked, and will probably still continually use them because you can sort pieces out by what colour they are, even when they're all primed and looking the same. So it's pretty convenient. Any other preparation for priming and airbrushing you'll see in my range of airbrushing tutorials, so I won't talk too much about that since it's already covered, and go on to more interesting aspects of this particular crappy kit. I will constantly remind my viewers, this is lacquer paints and this is primer, so these paints are extremely harmful for your respiratory system. Please wear an organic respirator. Just do it, man. It's bad for your health. I don't want to be held responsible for any of you getting those nasty ass diseases and going, hey, I've been following this guy's advice, man, you fucked me up. Nah, none of that, thanks. We'll be familiar with primer mostly coming in grey, though I'm using white this time because this is a fairly white mecha. It's got orange and stuff, so benefit from a white undercoat from a black undercoat. If I use black or grey, it'll take several coats of paint to get it back to white, and I'm too bloody lazy to do that. And since I haven't really done a lot of work in the way of modifying, I don't need a heavy primer to fill in micro scratches because I didn't do that much sanding. So this is absolutely appropriate, and I'm ready to spray some Mr. Hobby colour. With this Arios paint, I'm extremely excited to find that the actual orange matches the orange on the bloody sprue. So it's the correct colour, and it's absolutely crazy. It's almost like, what's the point of painting it? It's the same bloody colour. I could have left it, snapped together, or buy the bloody high grade and chip in the extra $10, but hey, I went ahead with it. With spraying this paint, it dries extremely fast, so orange peel is the major concern, and I had this one point where I didn't thin it enough and it started drying while I was passing the model or overspray, and it started producing string on the side or the profile of the kit, and that was pretty crazy. So make sure you definitely thin this paint enough. That problem's easily fixed if you invest in Mr. Leveling Thinner, which a lot of people claim is a mixture of Mr. Hobby Thinner, your lacquer thinner, and Mr. Mold Retardant. Mr. Mold Retardant slows down the drying speed of the actual paint and produces a brighter luster from the pigment, and the paint actually levels itself a lot better when it takes longer to dry. It's the reason why enamels always look pretty awesome, because it takes the longest to dry and harden, and the longer it takes to dry, the stronger the actual paint is, the more scratch resistant. So if you're looking into lacquers, check it out. It's definitely worth it. It will go a long way. Now the Arios is all nicely painted up in its uniformed colours. Use the old candy coating effect on the beam saber, which is silver and clear paint over it. It's looking absolutely great, and there's more colour variety than what it came out of the box, though it still doesn't have all that detail from the sample picture on the back of the box, and that's kind of shitty because it doesn't have all the colours, but surely you can source that from Mr. Hobby or whatever. Now, masking is going to be an absolute pain, so I'm only going to mask one bit on the leg, and the rest is going to have to be hand painting, which is a massive problem within itself, and you'll see why in a minute. I haven't done a masking tutorial yet, but plan to do so in the future, but consider this as a stent until I do that. My preferred choice of masking is Tamiya modelling tape because it's low tack. I avoid other tapes like the RC tapes because they're far too strong and can rip paint or leave a residue. If you remember Japanese Sandman, he was working on an Ewok Zack for a competition and he had a problem with this in the middle of his build while using acrylics for the first time or one of the first times. Other forms of masking is liquid mask, which is a latex, dries and you put paint over it, which is good for figures but really difficult to use. Blue tack. The rules of masking is paint's going to get everywhere, so if you're not going to cover a certain area, there's a chance of overspray getting there and ruining your undercoat. So once you put your Tamiya tape down on the critical edge of painting, you can put a cheaper tape around the other areas. Also, while painting, try to paint as light as possible or as a thin coat as possible. Paint directly down on top of the tape so it's not seeping underneath or leaking. When you're applying the tape, try to get it down as flat as possible and avoid any gaps where paint might seep under. Also, when removing the mask, try to do it in between the stages of drying and maturing where the paint's in a putty state. Of course, not touching the area where it's being painted so you don't get a chipping marks on the length of where you're removing the mask and you have as a crisp and sharp line as humanly possible. You get all sorts of amazing effects of masking, be it straight lines, panels or camouflage. With what I'm demonstrating right now, I achieved the exact look that I wanted and am extremely pleased. Go ahead and try it, man. It's a lot of fun and it's all about fun. Back to the builds. During the painting stage, I kind of fucked up a couple of times and either somehow got a black dot or a bit of debris or scratched the paint somewhere where it wasn't fully drying or maturing. This is easily fixed by getting a soft thin brush and just swabbing a tiny bit of paint over it. This stuff dries really quick, so if you do have a tiny problem that's not worth sanding back and spraying it on, always try hand painting it on top. If it still looks like shit, then you can proceed to sanding back and respraying. It's always a optional first aid check before you go around the long routes. This is the lazy man's way. At this stage, this is the biggest mistake of the build that I've made so far, though it's not really visible, but more so an inconvenience to me, which kind of another aspect to drag the fun out of this particular build, which, mind you, this isn't the worst kit I've built. The worst kit was the 220 scale Mark II. That was a really shit kit. Stay away from that. No fun at all. This one's second in line to that. That mistake being that these fast drying lacquers, Gaia and Mr. Hobby is no fun to hand paint whatsoever unless you're thinning with the level thinner or have the retardant. And to this date, I still don't own lacquer retardant due to having trouble importing it in. My country, and you'll probably find other Western countries, are extremely anal about chemicals, terrorists and shit like that, and if you want to get a tiny rattle can of paint, they're going to put all this security and charge you all this money to import it because they're afraid it's going to blow the bloody plane up. And it pisses me off belief that it's hard to get paints and whatnot from Japan to here. The best advice is go via Hong Kong. Hong Kong will send you anything in the post and even occasionally won't even write the contents of the parcel on the outer part of the box. The only way I could get around this issue was freshly applying the paint on the area that needed the paint, cleaning the brush immediately in a pot that had dirty thinner, re-wetting it with fresh thinner, applying the paint onto the surface again and just constantly cleaning the brush. Once the paint is on the actual nice and on the model itself, you can actually put some fresh thinner on your paint and smooth it and level it out on that surface without bleeding over onto other parts of the kit. This will give you the flattest and nicest effect possible without getting any paint strokes or unevenness in the actual paintwork. This works as small detail, though you'll definitely need retardant when painting much larger surfaces outside of this kit or scale. In regards to hand painting, I notice most people like to use acrylics due to their friendly nature of only needing water to thin or clean your equipment and being as safe as humanly possible with fumes, spillages, kids playing around it. Excellent for beginners. If you do thin it down with alcohols over water, it breaks down the pigments a lot nicer and it's a lot more easier to hand paint. But if you want the best hand painting paints, that medium is enamels due to its slow drying time and how well and smooth the pigments break down through their thinness, opposed to the more edgy way that acrylic alcohol breaks down acrylic paint. Enamels will always be easier. Holy hell, my long hair jumping in front of camera must scare children away. Another interesting thing to talk about at this stage is the neatness of the hand painting, and that normally incorporates a fine brush and being as slow as possible, tracing the paint around the edges of the area you want coloured, and then within the inside of the area you're able to colour in like a kid would colour in one of those colouring books. It's a lot of fun. Also, again, if you do make a mistake and go out of the lines, you're able to wait until it's fully dried and matured, and if it's not too thick where it's going to make a blob on the surface, you're able to grab the other colour and neaten it up. Though try to avoid this as much as possible because you can keep going backwards and forwards layering the paint, and it's going to give you an undesirable paint stroke effect on the kit. And the number one law to hand painting: take care of your brushes. If you want that tip to be around forever to create great detail, you need to clean it after every use with the appropriate thinner and make sure you keep dipping it in the actual thinner jar, never leaving your brush bristle first in the jar of water or thinner, and wiping it along a tissue or toilet paper repetitively and dipping it back in the thinner until no paint is coming off the brush and onto the paper. You're able to wrap the paper around the brush, squeeze and reform the tip with your fingers. If you look at after as careful and as properly as possible, your brush will last for many, many years for you to enjoy. Back to the project, some of the areas needed multiple colours like the face and the torso, particularly areas touching in each other's territory, so I had to paint a certain panel on each piece and wait for it to dry before I painted the panel next door or another piece of the kit to reduce as little handling as possible, giving at least a couple of days of drying time in between. I was extremely grateful that Bandai gave me the opportunity to have as much fine detail and little areas across this kit to fill with paint as much as I can or would like to. Though drop the ball's another area that this kit is still quite undesirable and has many fitting hiccups. Once I was finished, I didn't have any desire to ink, shadow, panel line or top coat this, as I was quite happy with just the colouring finish of the airbrushing and the hand painting, though apparently it's extremely toy-like. This kit was fantastic as a canvas to test a new material, ABS, and blowing all of those theories out of the water and trying out the Mr. Hobby Gundam colours. That was much appreciated, and the colouring is definitely really accurate to the actual kit itself. So they must have been using the same plastic colours as they did with the high grade. So that's very interesting to learn from Bandai's part. Another great thing about this project was it did test me with this small body and trying to work with the articulation areas and the fitting of the kit as far as I can. That was a good challenge, and I don't mind having this guy together, and I probably will try out another one of these 00 kits since I do have one sitting in my stash, but not for a while. But I still really dislike the subject matter, and normally when I'm picking up a kit it's always about the subject matter, and if the kit is horrible I still love the process because the actual subject of the kit is joyful to me and I know I'm going to have something that I appreciate. But now playing with something that I don't actually like and turning it into an actual challenge, this is where my motivation has gone astray. So a bit of a warning: if you want to tackle a project that's hard and you have no love for the actual item of the project or the MS or the subject, save yourself the pain. Unless you're one of these guys that does commission work, then you need to harden up and stick to it because you're getting paid and it's like a work thing. I never want this hobby to be like that to me though. Yay, it's all painted now. I'm extremely pleased at this stage because the rest is just gluing and snapping together. This video is extremely long and I can forgive most people that haven't stuck around this long or decided not to watch, because there's some people out there when they release a long video I'm like, ugh, you know, that's too much talking. But I'm hoping a lot of the information I've conveyed through this project is useful in filling the gaps in all of my short tutorials and stagnant videos. If a beginner was to watch it and see how all these processes are pieced together and how to tackle their kits and how other people like to see what's inside my head and how I like to tackle something that's foreign or different to me, I probably will do another video or two like this, but not too regularly since it is a lot of work. With the super gluing, I always used a cheap glue that you can buy in multiple packs. I'm not a believer of those more expensive ones though. Be extremely sparing and slow with them as possible. If you have to, empty the super glue on a separate part away from your model and use a toothpick to transfer the glue from the point you put on your table onto the piece to clamp together. And this is my finished result, and as far as I gotten at this stage, weathering and inking would be too far on such a lightly coloured model. It would look messy and dirty and done wrong, though at the same time I think I would have definitely done better by buying one of those Gashapon little trading toy figures. It looked the same as all the hours of effort I put into building and finishing it. As a kit, not recommended, don't buy it. As a challenge to take your skills a little further, yeah, do it man, it's gonna push you, it will. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I definitely do promise these long videos is not going to be a regular thing. I'll be lucky to do this again in another 12 months though. Thank you for tuning in. Leave a comment. I'm interested if you do guys really like what I did with this project and this video. Let me know if you want more of these and more information, or if I should have done it differently. Would really like the feedback. Catch you later.